What's up, everybody? Ron Harris here. Thanks for joining me on the channel. Today, we're going to be going over the top 6 of the 1990 Mr. Olympia contest, the only Mr. Olympia contest that was ever drug tested. I'll explain why, but first, please subscribe, like, share, ring the bell, do all that stuff. It doesn't cost you a thing. It helps me out as I grow this channel. So let's talk about why they were drug testing. 1990 was pretty much the high point of steroid hysteria in the United States. It all started in 1988 back at the Summer Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, where Ben Johnson got the gold medal for, it was a 100-yard dash. It was one of the 50-yard dash. He was a runner. Failed the drug test. They stripped him of his gold medal. And immediately we started seeing articles in magazines, TV talk shows, news shows like 60 Minutes, Dateline, doing big exposés of steroids in sports. People were getting very upset. Steroids were cheating. Lyle Alzado had cancer. He was blaming that on his steroid use. 1990, Congress in the United States passed the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 1990, making them a felony, making steroids in the same category of drugs as things like heroin, cocaine. So now they're not only illegal, but everyone's getting very, very concerned that sports are full of steroids and the athletes are cheating and they need to test, they need to get rid of it. So this spilled over into bodybuilding for many, many years, for at least 20, 25 years at this point. Ben Weider, founder of the IFBB, along with his brother Joe Weider, had been trying to get bodybuilding into the Olympics. He wanted it to be an Olympic sport. And if anyone could have done it, it would have been him. He used to go to all these meetings of the international Olympic committees. He was on the road all the time, meeting with heads of state, presidents, all kinds of committees, trying to get bodybuilding in the Olympics. And, those of us in the fans of the sport, we always felt that the reason it wasn't going to ever happen was because of the stigma surrounding the sport. And that, it was very obvious that our athletes were enhanced with steroids. Other sports, well, maybe they made them run faster, but you couldn't see a steroid user versus a non-steroid user on running down a track as obviously as you could a bodybuilder on steroids versus a bodybuilder who wasn't on steroids. Long story short, it never happened, but they did their best. In 1990, they decided for that year they were going to drug test the major competitions, which were the Arnold Classic at the time, had just started the year before, and the Mr. Olympia. So it didn't go well. 1990 Arnold Classic, there were 13 men in the show and 4 of them failed. They were Shawn Ray, Ralph Moeller, Nimrod King, Samir Bannout. Unfortunately, the results took 4 days to come in, which happened after the show was over. So Shawn Ray had won $60,000 in the trophy, and they stripped him of his title, gave it to Mike Ashley, the runner-up who had passed the steroid test, the drug test. And Shawn had to give the money back, give the trophy back. So they decided for the Olympia in September to avoid that fiasco happening again. They were going to test earlier on. They were going to test on Wednesday. So the results would be in by Friday so that they could have the disqualified guys out of the show and they wouldn't be on stage for Saturday. So the guys who failed the test in 1990 at the Mr. Olympia and did not appear in the contest were Barry DeMay, Muhammad Ben Aziza, J.J. Marsh, Van Walcott Smith, and Vince Comerford. They did not make it to the stage because their results came in positive. Now, that's not to say that everyone who passed was clean, was not on steroids. There was no time parameters given. It wasn't like you have to be natural 6 months or a year or whatever. It wasn't like that. It's like we're gonna have you do a urine test, the same standards of the IOC International Olympic Committee, and if you fail, you're out of the show. And that's what they did. So there were a lot of rumors going around that guys were using masking agents. Dan Duchesne, who was the original steroid guru, he was supposedly coaching a couple guys, not coaching in terms of their diet and everything, but just to help them pass the drug test. And I think they were actually even selling in the supplement stores at the time something so you could pass a drug test for steroids. Anyway, I'll get into that as we look at some of the physiques. I'll give my opinion on who I think was really clean, or at least had been off for a while, and who wasn't, who was still fully loaded, because as you know, if you know anything about steroids and testing, certain things clear your system very quickly. Fast-acting items like Tren, because it's an acetate, it's out quick. Testosterone propionate, much, much quicker clearance time than a longer ester like cypionate or enanthate, or a blend like sustanon. Pills, any kind of pills, D-bol, Anavar, Winstrol tabs, any of those orals that you take would clear your system very, very quickly within a matter of a few days. So if you really knew what you were doing, you could be on steroids up until a week before the show, maybe even sooner than that, and still pass the test. So a few of the guys did not. But let's get into it, guys. Let's take a look. Let's start with 6th place. This was Francis Benfato from France. Okay, so Francis, we saw in the last video I did. He was 5'6". He was about 200, 205 pounds. Crazy condition here. I love this guy's physique. This was the best he ever did in the Olympia. He was in the Olympia the year before this was his debut. He took 12th place in Rimini, Italy. Took 6th place here. Was 7th place at the 91 Olympia, which was in Orlando, Florida. 92 Olympia in Helsinki, Finland, which was Dorian's first win. He was way down in 15th, and he was never seen on Olympia stage again. I believe he came back into the Masters Olympia much, much later. He never won a pro show. I really feel because he just wasn't big enough. And, the guys were smaller back then than they are now on average, but still size-wise didn't really compare with the bigger guys. But, Lord, look at the proportions, the shape, the symmetry. Excellent poser. He is one of the guys who inspired the creation of the classic physique division. Yeah, you can see the legs are kind of light, but it was his physique along. Look at the calves, just beautiful proportions on this guy. And again, the condition was flawless. He was such a great poser. Put a lot of time and effort into the transitions, the poses, hit a lot of very unique shots. Man, I mean, this is one of the guys, doesn't get enough credit, I don't think, as far as when we talk about the best guys of the 80s and 90s. I don't think enough people mention this guy's name, but Francis Benfato from France, he was excellent. And again, I believe he was one of the inspirations for the creation of classic physique. If they had had a division called classic bodybuilding, where maybe there was a weight cap for your height or something like that back then, or certainly if they had classic physique, I think this guy would have been top of the game. I mean, look at he would still do, even if you put this guy on stage in the classic physique Olympia now, I think he would do very, very well. I think he wouldn't have to lose that much weight either, honestly, with the new parameters they have for the weight. Okay, let's go into 5th place was Rich Gaspari. Rich at this point had already taken 2nd place 3 times at the Mr. Olympia. He had made his debut at the Olympia in 85 with the 3rd place at only 22 years old. 86, 87, 88, 3 years in a row, he took 2nd place to Lee Haney. 88, yeah. So 89, started to slide down just a bit. He had taken 4th, and here he slid down to 5th. By 1991, the next year he was all the way down in 10th, and that would be his final Mr. Olympia appearance. Rich was somebody who was very, very good at a very young age, and I honestly believe what happens in a lot of cases like that is they sort of burn out their physiques. And you could also see the pec hair there. On the right, his left pec, which he had torn in preparation for the 89 Arnold Classic the year before this, and never got surgery on it. You didn't see the deformation in the pec when he won the Arnold because it had just happened. But he said a couple weeks after the Arnold was over, you could definitely see it. And he had waited too long. Scar tissue had formed. That's not I wouldn't say that that's the reason he slid down. The only reason he slid down. I think he was into such heavy training. He was getting hurt. I just don't think his body was able to hold up to that intensity and the heavy weights, indefinitely. Nobody's a machine. He's a human being like anybody else. But he had a heck of a run, and he did very, very well. Pushed Lee Haney to the brink. 3 years in a row, was a very close runner-up. And, right after 88 Olympia, which we covered in another video, he did 7 Grand Prix tours in a row, went back and forth with Lee Labrada, and he bested Lee in 4 out of those 7 shows. The Dragon Slayer, Rich Gaspari. Yeah, an early idol of mine. I had pictures of him all over my wall. I've said this before. I thought he was great. Moving on to the next guy, Mike Christian in 4th place. I like Mike a lot. So I want to preface all that by saying I like him a lot. I think he's a very cool guy, very down to earth. He's funny. He's got a warm, charismatic personality. I really like Mike. And he was actually the first pro bodybuilder I ever met. In 1988, I was living in Los Angeles that summer. I was living in Venice. I actually lived around the block, a 5-minute walk away from Gold's Venice, and I was too scared to go in there. I was a chicken shit little kid. I worked at a video store called Music Plus on Washington Boulevard on Marina del Rey, which is a couple miles away. And Mike used to come in there and rent videos. And one time, I was at the desk, the counter, and he came up to my register and got the video. I was like, Mike, a big fan, blah, blah, blah. And, I was in awe of the guy. I had pictures of him up on my wall. And I ran into him coming out of Gold's. I wouldn't go into Gold's. I was too chicken shit. But I remember sometimes I would walk by and go to the front door. This is what a knucklehead I was. I would go just listen to the clang of the weights. But I was too scared to go in because I felt like, oh, maybe when I'm a bigger guy, I'll go in there. And of course, later I became a member there a few years later. In 1991, I was training there. I was driving and training there 3-4 days a week. Anyway, Mike Christian, let's take a look. He was 4th place. Okay, so Mike was a stalwart. They called him the Iron Warrior. I had actually a full-size, not only pictures of him, I had a full-size poster of this guy on my wall. That's how much I loved his physique. Legs never quite matched that upper body, but that upper body was nuts. Triceps, delts, chest, back, traps. He was a specimen, Mike. So let's see. He had turned pro by winning not the 84 Nationals, which he did win the overall, but back then, in those early years, you still had to go to the World Amateur Championships, where he did that. He won the heavyweights at the Worlds up against other guys like Barry DeMay from many other countries. So back then, you really had to earn your pro card. You couldn't even earn your pro card in the United States. So 85, Mr. Olympia was his debut. He took 5th. 86, he was all the way up in 3rd place. 87 in Gothenburg, Sweden, he was 4th. 89, the year before this, he was 6th in Italy, and here, 4th place. This would be his final Mr. Olympia. He won 5 Grand Prix. He won 5 pro shows. 3 of those were European Grand Prix tours where he used to beat his rival, Gary Stridham. The reason they were rivals, they both lived in LA and they both owned their own clothing companies. Gary had one called Crazy Wear. Mike had one called Platinum Everywhere. They sold the same kind of clothes, the baggy pants, the big sweatshirts, the string tank tops. So it was a pretty interesting rivalry, not only on the bodybuilding stage, but in the business world, because all the bodybuilders are wearing their stuff back. So when I said all those nice things, this is the only mean thing I'm going to say is I don't think he was natural at all here. I think Dan Duchesne or somebody helped him beat the test. He looks fully loaded for bear here, as good as he ever looked, whereas we're going to see some of these other guys. Even Gaspari looked a little worse for wear to me. But when we see a couple of these guys, you'll see. So was he cheating? I mean, he passed the test. They were supposed to be they were supposed to pass the test. There was never any, like I said, they never said, you guys have to be clean for X amount of time for this show. We're going to drug test you. And if you pass, you pass. If you fail, you fail. He passed. So was he natural? In my heart of hearts, I think he was fully loaded. But I also think a few of the guys who passed the test had been using right up until the show, or right up until it was safe to use whatever they were using, orals, pills, or fast-acting things like test-propionate. They didn't really have Tren back then. They had Parabolin from France, which was it was a very, very similar. Chemically, I think it's the same as Tren, but it was made for humans. It was the only. Tren's never been made by a pharmaceutical company for humans. Parabolin from France was. These come in these 76 milligram amps. That's how strong it was. All you needed was 76 milligrams. Dorian said many times he would take 2 of those a week. Plus a couple other things, but that's all he needed was 152 milligrams a week. We got guys do that every day of Tren, 150, 200. Not recommended. Let's move on. Let's move on to Shawn Ray. Okay, so Shawn, in the 88 Olympia video that I did with you guys recently, he did not do well in his debut. He was busy. A couple of guys pointed out to me in the comments he was still going to college. He had too much going on that year. Didn't come in shape, and he was 13th. But he took 89 off, and he came back. And from 1991 to 2001, 12 Olympias in a row, Shawn was top 12. So let's see. He just going down the line: 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 4th, 2nd, 3rd, fifth, fifth, fourth, fourth. Both second places, 94, 96, were to Dorian Yates. And I think you could make a strong argument that he probably should have won at least one of those. With Shawn Natural here, I don't know how long he'd been off things, but he still looks pretty juiced up to me. You know, most people here do. There's only really one guy when we get to him. It's Lee Haney, the only guy I think really took it seriously and went off drugs for the show. I could be wrong. I don't think I've talked to Shawn. I talk to Shawn all the time, especially when we both worked at MD. We talked all the time, and I don't think I ever asked him. You know, maybe I was just being didn't want to offend him by asking, you know, were you really clean for the 1990 Olympia? Because, like I said, they just had to pass a test, and he had. But the thing that leads me to believe that he might have at least been off for a couple months was that he had lost the Arnold, or he had won the Arnold and then been stripped of the title, had to give back the prize money and the trophy just what's that, 6 months before this. So yeah, it was in his best interest. And you know, I've seen him bigger and fuller, so I believe he was off for a couple months. You know, maybe he'll tell me how long he was off for. I'm curious, but you know, like I would never ask Mike Christian. I love Mike. I think he's the coolest guy. Such a good attitude. I'm gonna keep saying nice things about him because, like I said, I'm not saying cheating because this wasn't the Olympics, guys. Do I feel like, you know, they really should have all been natural? It's rumored. I don't know if Peter McGuff's the one that said this, the late Peter McGuff, who I love dearly, that Joe Weider was so upset at how bad the guys looked after this Olympia that was the end of drug testing. He asked Peter or something, or maybe it was Dr. Bob Goldman. He was the one really behind the steroid testing that year. He was the one who really was adamant about having the guys tested. So Joe Weider either asked one of these guys, or I don't know who it was. He said, "These guys, do you want these guys to look like worms?" Basically saying that he was very disappointed with how bad they looked when they were off drugs. You know, and I'm only covering the top six. Few of the guys that did not make the top six, I'm not going to name names, but they were clearly much smaller, much softer than they had ever been before on stage. So they were off drugs. So that's what you get when you go off drugs. Let's take a look at the runner-up, Lee Labrada. So Lee, this was a time he came very close. After judging, I haven't seen the score sheet in years, but he was ahead of Lee Haney after the judging for this, and he lost it in the posing round, which is weird because he's a better poser than Lee Haney. Let's be real. Lee Haney was a very good poser, but Lee Labrada was just on another level from almost everybody that's ever been on a stage. So he had done made his debut in the Olympia in 87 with the third place. Los Angeles Olympia in 88, he was fourth. He had been second place the year before, Rimini, Italy. So this was 2 second places in a row for Lee Labrada, which, considering he was 176 pounds, anywhere between 176 and 185 at his heaviest on the Olympia stage, he not only held his own, he pushed Lee Haney. He was ahead of Lee Haney in the judging. Yeah, you could see the back was kind of weak. He was a little downsized here. I think weight-wise, he wasn't really down that much in weight, but I had seen him fuller than this before. I'd seen him tighter than this before. So I don't know. I don't know what he was or wasn't on gear here. Again, I've said I don't care if they were or not. I don't. If they were, I don't consider it cheating, because why were they even doing this? I think it was more of a show for the public, more of a political thing to try to get bodybuilding into the Olympics. You know, I mean, why would you really be that concerned about taking steroids out of bodybuilding? They've been a part of the sport for decades and decades. It is what it is. You know, that's what makes these superhuman looking physiques. Guys with awesome genetics, and then you add on, you know, the training, the dedication, the eating, the sleeping. Then you throw in sprinkle in the anabolics, and kaboom, you have these ungodly physiques. And you know, we have guys much larger than this right now. His son Hunter is, you know, quite bigger than that. So we're going to finish up with Lee Haney, guys. This was his 7th Olympia win, where he would tie the record held up until that point by the great Arnold Schwarzenegger. But Lee did 7 in a row. Arnold won from 70 to 75, took 5 years off, came back in 1980, controversial win, and won a 7th win. Lee did it 7 times in a row and would come back the next year in 91, better than ever, much better than what we're going to see here. All right. So this was definitely a natural Lee Haney. I strongly suspect, and I would never ask him. I love Lee, and I have so much respect for the man. I would never ask him, when did you stop using that year? This was September. When did you go off everything? I don't think he was ever a heavy user to begin with, but he was clearly off gear here to me. I'd never seen him this small. Nobody had ever seen him this small on Olympia stage, this soft on Olympia stage. Don't get me wrong. He still looks great compared to the average competitor, but this was a very dubious win, a very questionable win. A lot of people had Labrada beating him at this show, which is crazy because he had a good 50 pounds on Labrada, 50 or 50 plus. He still had the shape, the muscle quality, a good amount of size, but this was not the Lee Haney that we were used to seeing. He was definitely smaller and softer, and that would be a direct consequence of going off gear. I honestly believe he was the only guy in that top 6 that I would bet you good money was not on gear for at least a couple months before this. Maybe even 3 months. Who knows? You guys can put in the comments what you think. Give me your best guesses. Give me your best guesses for how long each of the guys that we saw, or anybody that you want to comment on. That's what's fun. It's speculating. And, I could ask them, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to tell the truth. So let's go to the awards. Okay, so I think at this point they've already given out 5th and 6th, I think. Let's see whose name they call out. Did I tape the whole thing? Yeah, so, okay, they already given Ben Fado 6th place. Here, Rich takes, who's giving him the kiss? I don't know. Look how big the hair was back then. Oh, man. Yeah, look how young everybody was back then. They were all still in their 20s here. I know Rich was. Yeah, look at Haney, especially from a distance. Yeah, now that I'm looking at Shawn, I think Shawn was clean here too. He definitely was down in size and fullness. Christian was not. And, I kind of wonder if they penalized him for that. I don't know. The judges. I don't know. Just a thought. Yeah, Shawn was definitely clean here. I think this top 3 here, they were clean, or at least had been for a couple months, which is, all that they really needed to do. Things like DECA stay in the system for many months. That can be detected for 9-10 months. So they clearly hadn't been on that for a very long time. Winstraw shows up for a long time. But Test clears the system pretty well. Oh, look at Lee. You could see he was crestfallen. He really thought he had it. I think he knew after judging. I think he was informed that he was ahead. And to lose it like that after coming so close for the 2nd year in a row, that had to hurt. 2nd place sucks, but 2 years in a row, everybody dreams about winning the Mr. Olympia. He almost had it. But Lee gets his 2nd. There's Ben Weeder, late Ben Weeder, giving him the medal. This guy looks like he's got a toupee on. I don't know who that was. And then Joe Weeder. It's Joe Weeder, Mr. Olympia, giving him the Sandow trophy, the paycheck. Puts the check on the ground. Instructs Lee to hold up the Sandow trophy. And he holds it aloft, as we say. And that was the 1990 Mr. Olympia. Guys, leave some comments below. And what do you think about that? We refer to it often as a failed experiment. Would you like to see drug testing back at the Olympia? They only tested one more time a few years later. I think it was 96 for diuretics. They didn't test for steroids. And that was a fiasco because a couple of the guys failed, including G.A. Cutler, who threatened to sue them because the protocols, the testing protocols weren't really, the way the specimens were collected and everything was not exactly following the guidelines, the specifications of the International Olympic Committee, which was ostensibly what they were trying to replicate with the testing for these shows. And as we know, bodybuilding never made it to the Olympics. I personally don't care. I'm perfectly happy with bodybuilding being a niche sport. I don't think it was ever going to get mainstream acceptance or a fan base in the mainstream because it's too hard for people to understand and appreciate, people that aren't part of the lifestyle, part of bodybuilding. So I'm glad that they didn't keep the drug testing. Of course, I'm not going to say I love seeing the guys on steroids, but they look better. As a fan, I like to see the physiques look as good as they can. I want to see them at their full potential, and that takes some PEDs. I mean, let's be real. It does. So, yeah, leave some comments, guys. Let me know what you think. I'm curious because this is still debated. They still talk about should we do drug testing, and they're bringing back tested shows to the NPC. That's already started for this year. And they're going to have a couple tested pro shows next year there are pros who turn pro as naturals because there's a couple natural pro qualifiers. They don't typically do very well in the non-tested shows. So we'll see what happens with the tested shows. I'm curious. I definitely want to check it out. Anyway, guys, that's it. Appreciate you all watching. Of course, remind you one more time, please subscribe, like, share, ring that bell. Doesn't cost you anything. It helps me grow the channel, of course. And follow me on Instagram at Ron Harris Muscle. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying this series. I'm having a lot of fun going back into memory lane myself. So we'll see you right here on the next one. Bye-bye now.